In 1900, New York's slums teemed with newly arrived immigrants. It's hard to fathom how they survived. Behind every face you met lay a forgotten struggle, a silent battle hidden in the chaos of the tenements. 59 Mulberry Street, photographed in 1888, is located in the Little Italy area. It was called Bandits' Den because it was the stronghold of notorious criminal gangs. At that time, it was one of the poorest and most criminal areas in the city, and the streets were filled with chaos and distress. In 1936, at the intersection of Pike Street and Henry Street in the Lower East Side, pedestrians shuttled between old buildings. On one side of the sidewalk, a large pile of garbage was randomly piled up, which, together with the retro street scene and the bridge in the distance, outlined a unique picture of the blending of time. In 1900, a beggar sat quietly beside a wrought iron fence on a New York street, his cloudy eyes looking into the air, his hands stretched out weakly, as if begging for a glimmer of hope in the indifferent world. On July 6, 1912, on a scorching hot street, a group of children gathered around a huge block of ice, licking it with their tongues to fight the summer heat with the coolness. The grocery store sign stood by quietly witnessing this summer scene. In February 1912, on the brick pavement of Bleecker Street, an Italian immigrant struggled, carrying a dry goods box on his head, moving forward step by step in the old days of the city. In the early 20th century, a beggar sat quietly on the streets of New York. His face was wounded, his figure was lonely, and the bamboo basket beside him was empty. In 1890, in a cramped corner of a city street, a few bricks and stones enclosed a small space where street children curled up and fell into a deep sleep, temporarily entrusting their suffering and fatigue to this moment of peace. In February 1912, garbage piled up like a small mountain in front of the entrance to the apartment building at 5359 McDougal Street. During the garbage workers' strike of November 8 to 11, 1908, chaos and poor conditions on the city's streets became increasingly serious as crowds gathered and garbage trucks were stranded. In February 1912, a woman walked hurriedly on the street near Astor Square, carrying a bundle of clothes on her head. These clothes were the work she was going to take back to her humble home to sew. At that time, poor immigrant workers often had to work long hours to make a living, and they had to bring the work back home, continuing their difficult livelihood in exhaustion and embarrassment. In 1899, in the dim basement of number 11 Ludlow Street in the Lower East Side, damp and dilapidated, a street vendor huddled in a simple bunk, taking a short nap to take a break from the hustle and bustle of daytime hawking, and continued to write a hard chapter of life in a cramped corner at the bottom of the city. In 1902, two women and a man meet in front of an outdoor toilet in New York City. At the turn of the century, most apartment buildings in New York still lacked indoor plumbing, so simple outdoor facilities had become a part of people's daily lives. On February 24, 1917, a food vendor stood by his basket and sold his goods to passers-by on the streets of the Lower East Side. In December 1913, the aftermath of the fire was still spreading along Monroe Street. In the narrow alley, several bodies were lying, their charred clothes and twisted postures silently telling the hideousness of the disaster, carving the grief and cruelty into the cracks of the bricks and stones in winter. On February 7, 1910, on Bowery Street, shrouded in a cold winter, a row of men in heavy coats and top hats stood quietly in the shadow of a restaurant sign that read, "Hot lunch all day," waiting to receive bread to fill their stomachs. The hardships of the times and the determination to survive were condensed in the queue on this old street. In February 1909, the municipal homeless boarding house was officially opened to ease the plight of the city's homeless. Around 1909 to 1920, the boarding house was constructed across 25th Street from an abandoned lot. At its busiest, it welcomed over 600 new applicants daily who sought shelter from the elements. In 1915, on Pitt Street and Rivington Street in the Lower East Side, the shabby vendor stalls, the scattered garbage, the smell of poverty lingering in every corner, all pieced together a true portrait of life at the bottom of society in those bygone days. In March 1912, the railings of apartment buildings at 260-268 Elizabeth Street in the slums, draped with clothes laid out by residents, surrounded by dilapidated buildings, overlooked by laundry hanging to dry, stood amid messy streets where cars and pedestrians mingled. This scene, thick with the slaver of poverty and life, mirrored the daily struggles of the lower class. In 1890, in a cramped corner of the slum, a street dweller quietly settled in front of a simple shack, its walls cobbled from weathered wooden boards, surrounding ruins, jagged rooftops. They pressed poverty and hardship into the shadowed world, silent footnotes to the old era's lower-class struggles. In May 1909, protests flooded the streets. Children held signs in English and Yiddish, their voices raised against child labor's plight. At the turn of the century, nearly 1/5 of the U.S. workforce were under 16. New York was no exception to this cruel reality. As the tide of time surged, so did the suffering of child laborers, caught in its unforgiving current. In February 1912, several children, some sitting, some standing, lingered in the messy courtyard behind the apartment building at 134.5 Thompson Street. Dilapidated shacks loomed around them, debris scattered at their feet, painting a portrait of lower-class childhood wrapped in poverty and desolation. In 1892, in a dark corner of the Sun's printing room, 2 newsboys dropped off to sleep, exhausted. Back then, scrambling to sell papers was boys' only way to help their families, yet this hard labor earned them nothing but exploitation and scorn. Years of pent-up grievance finally sparked the 1899 Newsboys' Strike, a sensational uprising that marked a turning point in the lower classes' struggle. In 1903, Chinatown windows overflowed with goods. Woks, herbal scales, embroidered silks, each a tool of survival for Chinese immigrants. Beneath shop awnings, tales of laborers toiling in a foreign land unfolded silently, weaving east into west, stitching livelihoods into the fabric of old-world streets. Between 1900 and 1920, shops nested under awnings along Little Italy's streets. Street merchants stood guard over their stalls, their foreign livelihoods and Italian customs slowly blending into the streets day and night. In the years before 1890, Hell's Kitchen was a patchwork of old buildings and chaotic construction. Brick and stone structures looming beside dilapidated shacks, horse-drawn carriages rattling through dust-choked roads. Workers toiled up steep slopes and over rubble heaps, their labor carving poverty, struggle, and the raw grit of urban growth into the neighborhood's forgotten past. At the close of the 19th century, several figures huddled on a dilapidated Lower East Side porch, its bricks mottled, doors and windows broken. In this cramped corner, poor souls wove their hunger and fatigue into the gray twilight of bygone days, their shadows merging with the decay around them. In February 1912, Bowery Street, both a street and a namesake neighborhood, ran through what is now Manhattan's East Village. Back in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when immigrants flooded into New York, this area became a hotbed of crime, poverty, and taboos, a dark chapter that stained the neighborhood's history. In 1902, a boy worked at a roadside water pump in Trinity Square, south of Cedar Street. Back then, such public water pumps were a lifeline for poor families without running water, silent fixtures that sustained the daily lives of the lower class. Between 1934 and 1938, a pigeon coop stood silent on a rooftop, its simple fence enclosing a tiny world where pigeons perched or flapped their wings, caught between the jagged outlines of city buildings. In 1912 or thereabouts, on a cobblestone street, a little girl with a playful bow in her hair clutched a piece of cloth for homework, ready to carry it back to her tenement to sew. In those bygone days, the toil and survival of lower-class children were woven into the fabric and stitched into the walk home. Silent stories hidden in every thread.